and welcome to New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. New England is filled to the brim with talent. Let's meet some of our local and global people, stories, and ideas that make up and color our identity. And today we have a wonderful person with us, Leslie Wheeler. And we just found out that you and I are neighbors almost. We live
right.
Just a few blocks apart.
Yeah,
Welcome to the show. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your life as a writer. Where did you start?
Well, I am somebody who always wanted to be a writer, except for a very brief period when I was in grade school when I wanted to be a ballerina.
Oh, yeah.
And I confess that I was not a great reader as a child, but I grew up surrounded by storytellers. I spent a lot of time daydreaming. And I've just always been very imaginative, and I was writing stories from grade school on, but it wasn't until later in life that I was published.
When was your first publication?
My first publication was, oh dear.
Was it a book or
the first publication was, yeah, I got it now. Okay, it was, yes. In 1976.
That's a long time ago.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
And what it was I had worked for an educational publisher, and they decided they wanted to move into the trade market. And Jimmy Carter was running for president.
Oh, yeah.
So they commissioned little me to write a sort of a campaign biography of him, and they gave me 6 weeks to do it.
Incredible.
And yeah, I almost had a nervous breakdown, but as one of the editors said, you know, I said, what if I just disappeared? He said, we'll follow you.
Oh.
So
Jimmy Carter, there's a lot of discussion about whether he was a great president, but he's the best ex-president we've ever had by a long shot. What a privilege to write about him.
It really was, and I admire him greatly for what he's done after.
So then you went into fiction?
Well, then I wrote another biography, which was, I came up with the idea. It was a story that was very close to my heart. I was very involved in the burgeoning feminist movement, and so what I did was a biography in letters of Lucy Stone, who was a 19th century feminist and abolitionist.
Yes.
And her husband, Henry Brown Blackwell. So it was basically a connection of letters, and I wrote an introduction and connecting material. But I realized when I was working on the Stone biography that I wanted different things to happen. Like, what if she married somebody else? Or what if she hadn't married at all? And so that really, I had always wanted to write a novel. So I wrote a very long historical novel that was kind of long on incident, but short on overall plot. And it's never been published, except for one piece of it was published as a story.
Yes.
And from that, I found myself taking a course at the Cambridge Center for Adult Education by a woman who's done very well as a mystery writer, Barbara Shapiro.
Oh, I know Barbara.
A lot of people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, at that time, I had this idea, as somebody who loves history, everyone had always told me, oh, you should visit Plymouth Plantation. You'll love it.
Yeah, that was your first book then.
That was my first book,
yes.
and my first fiction, and I call that that series. There are two other books in the series. I call that my Living History Mysteries, because while it's set at the Living History Museum, where you have people portraying the 17th century people who lived there.
Yeah.
But it's set in the present day. So it's really a murder that occurs under the with among the first person interpreters.
Yes,
the people
in the Plymouth plantation.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And I had a great time researching that. I spent a lot of time at the village and a lot of time interacting with the people there, and so I kind of picked up their lingo, their Jacobean English, and I am a sort of a half-conscious, not unconscious mimic, so it was kind of a perfect.
Yeah, so you also have a book set in Gettysburg.
That's
it's
right.
It's modern, set in the Gettysburg Monument.
And that is, I've been a Civil War buff for a long time. My parents lived in the D.C. area for a while, and I visited a lot of the battlefields, and I had a wonderful visit years earlier with my parents and to the Gettysburg battlefield. And I remember sitting in the back of the car, and one of their friends read from Douglas Southall Freeman's biography of Lee, and that, I had to quote it in the book. And
so that's great. But most of your books take place in New England.
That's right. Yeah, that was a departure for me.
That was a departure. Your roots are here, right?
Yes, definitely.
And in fact, let's get to your latest book, which has just come out here. Called Rattlesnake Hill.
Yes.
Which I've read, and it's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
And it takes place in the Berkshires.
Yes, and I've lived in the Berkshires for many, many years. First full-time and now part-time. And I'm somebody who loves mountain landscapes and lakes, and I just fell in love with the Berkshires, but I've also, living there, you can't help being aware of the dark side of the region, which is in the lives of really hard-scrabble lives that some of the people are living. The locals who, when the tourists, they're the people who are left when the tourists flee.
Right. Yeah. So I think of the Berkshires as Tanglewood.
Yes.
All the people that come from Boston and New York, and but you have a very different Berkshires.
It is. Well, I call it the other Berkshires, and there's a place where my main character, Catherine Stinson is she's only been away for part of a day, and she passes through Stockbridge. It's all decorated with Christmas decorations a la Norman Rockwell, and then she realizes, my goodness, I'm going into this totally different world of dark back roads, winding roads, where you really have to be careful that you don't get hit by a wrong-sided car, or you hit a deer. And it's such a different world.
It's a different world, and but she's going back for a reason. She's going back, in a sense, to trace her roots, or
yes, and actually, in real life. I based the town of New Nottingham in the book is based on the town where I have a house. It's called New Marlborough. And in fact, the man who founded New Marlborough is a Wheeler. So I figure he's probably a descendant. My grandfather Wheeler came from New England originally too, so that's...
Wheeler, would that be for a ship? The person who, would that be the name? Is that where it come from?
Well, or wheeling a cart or something like that.
Yeah. We're talking with Leslie Wheeler, and a very successful mystery writer. I don't know how many books you have. How many books do you have out now?
Well, I have 3 in my Living History series, and this is the first in a new series of Berkshire Hilltown Mysteries.
Yeah. This is the first one. You're working on another one. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yes.
But this one was so interesting. So this woman, Catherine, goes out from Boston, finds she has a photograph, a very old photograph.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'm actually somebody also who's interested in old photographs, family photographs, and I've looked at them, and to me, every photograph has a story, and she wants to find out who this woman it was.
There's a woman who you don't see her face in the photograph. Is that right?
No, you do see her face. It's in a daguerreotype.
It's a daguerreotype, but
yeah,
you see her face. Oh,
you do
right.
You do see her face, and Catherine and the rest of the family really know is that her distant ancestor, her family used to live in this town, and when he left and went to California, sort of a reverse migration to what I did.
Yeah.
And he took her photograph with him, and nobody knows who she was. He would never reveal her name. So it's one of these family mysteries. I think every family has sort of secrets, mysteries, and the fun thing is writing about them, answering them yourself, I think, in a way.
It's one of the things that interests me, being a slight naturalist, is snakes. Mm-hmm. You have a couple of rattlesnakes. One was a fake rattlesnake that she finds in a house that someone puts there to scare her. Another was a real rattlesnake that they found on the road. I just want to say there are 3 venomous snakes in the New England area. And they're all very rare. They're really endangered. You don't really have to worry about snakes here in the New England area. We're really lucky. There's other places. There's in Sicily. If you get bit by a certain viper, that's it. You have no recourse.
Right.
But here, they're very rare. I think 2 of them are endangered, in fact. And the last person who got killed supposedly by a venomous snake it happened in 1740s or something. So you have no worries about snakes.
No, not really. But you will find in the Berkshires and elsewhere, you'll find Rattlesnake Hill. Yeah. You will find Rattlesnake Road. You'll find Rattlesnake Mountains. Yeah. And that is kind of memorializes the fact that they were so prevalent. And you can imagine what it must have been like for the colonists coming from England, and they never seen snakes like this before. These large snakes with the rattle. Yes. And I found this wonderful quote from Benjamin Franklin that when the colonists weren't getting along too well with the Brits at home, that he said, you know what we should really do? They're sending their was saying they're sending their convicts to us, and we should send them our rattlesnakes.
Oh yeah. So tell us a little bit more. What happens in the story here? How does the story develop with Catherine? She goes, and what does she find out?
Well, she learns that. She learns this woman's name. She learns that, I don't know how much I want to give away, but basically she uncovers 2 love triangles, one in the distant past, over 100 years ago, and one in the more recent past, 5 years ago.
Right.
And interestingly enough, the family that's involved in the earlier triangle, a descendant is also involved in the more recent triangle. And it turns out that she is living in the house that was once occupied by the woman who's killed in the more recent triangle.
We have to solve this case. I don't want to give the story away either,
I know.
But it's a very interesting story that unfolds. She goes and rents this house, and she doesn't exactly know what she wants to do, but she knows she wants to do something, right? She wants to uncover something, and it becomes clearer as the book progresses. Now tell us, you researched a lot of New England history. It seems like research is one of the things you really enjoy doing. What was New England like 100 years ago, let's say?
Well, there were a lot of mills that are no longer there.
Course, yes.
And there were more towns. You can walk through the woods in the Berkshires, and I've gone on many walks with the New Marlborough Land Trust, where you will see the remains old foundations,
Uh,
and you know, they're sort of these lost towns.
Right.
And actually, in I think it's kind of funny, but in New Marlborough, I've heard stories about. There are some wonderful stories that that I found that. There, in the really old days, there were New Marlborough is a township, and it has 5 villages, and some of these two of these smaller villages in the old days were called Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh,
and
really?
There is still the Sodom Road in, which takes you into Connecticut. Interestingly enough, I've driven on it.
Yeah.
I've driven on it. Yeah.
Where is
yeah.
that exactly?
Well, New Marlborough is like really right on the line with Connecticut. It's
I see.
It's very close to Canaan, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And the road will take you to.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've seen in New England is so many towns, they had an industry, could have been making shoes or toys or furniture or clothing, and the business closed down because of different forces, whether they be globalization or competition, whatever it is.
And the gold rush, you know.
The gold rush.
The gold rush had a big impact
Really?
in terms of, and the land is not that great for farming.
No.
And that's why we have all these stone walls, and again, you find all these stone walls. My property came with stone walls.
Yes.
Because what are they going to do with all these stones, all these rocks? I took one of them and I made it a sort of a doorstep into my house. Yeah.
So the other thing that there were more, as you said, there were more farms, so there was less forest.
Yes.
Now there are more trees in the New England area than there were 100 years ago, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, the first settlers that came were really they weren't forest people, and they really just their first thing they wanted to do was cut down the trees.
Yeah.
But then when they left, the trees and they stopped and farming declined. Then the trees were able to grow back. Yeah.
So let me ask a little different question now. We're talking with Leslie Wheeler. This is New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. Now, what are some of the philosophical ideas that you have throughout your works?
Well, one important theme that's in my Living History Mysteries is how the past is repeated in the present. And for instance, Murder at Plymouth Plantation and also Murder at Spouter's Point, which is actually a fictionalized Mystic Seaport, I deal with the often troubled relationship between the white people and the native people from historically and into the present. Mm-hmm. And with Gettysburg, it's really, because I focus on Confederate reenactors, it's really how some people in this country are still fighting the Civil War.
Yes.
In this book, it's more, I think there are echoes of the past, obviously, in the present, how the past is repeated. I think for me, one of the big themes of this book, of Rattlesnake Hill, is the power of stories. We hear stories when we're growing up,
right,
and they really influence our lives. In my book, they can make you, if you hear the right story, you might fall in love with the storyteller, or you might, the other extreme is, or you might kill someone.
Yes.
If you firmly believe to one version of the truth, and to the exclusion of everything else. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think also another theme in your books is history, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah. And you go through that. Now, you've written a lot. Tell us, do you write every day?
I try to, but it doesn't always work out. Sometimes my muse, goes out of town or whatever, goes south. I'm not somebody who will, feels bad if I don't write a certain number of words, or if I don't write for a certain number of hours. I mean, some days I won't write. Sometimes I can write all day.
Do you outline, or do you know?
Oh, no.
Everything comes...
Yeah. For me, I'm a pantser, and what that means is I'm a seat of the pants writer.
Right.
That I know a few things. I have a vague idea of what the story is going to be, and E.L. Doctorow put it better than I can when he said that writing a novel, or writing anything almost, is like driving in the fog with your high beams on. You can only see as far as your high beams show you, but you can make the whole journey that way.
And do you start off with an idea, and that idea might go this way or that way, right?
That's right. That's right. And I think I don't so much start with an idea. I start with a setting.
A setting?
Yeah.
As opposed to a character?
Yes.
A setting.
Yes. Because the setting can lead you.
So here it's Berkshires, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can come out of setting. It's very important to me. So here's my setting. Who lives here? Those are going to be my characters. Who visits? More characters. And what could happen in this particular setting? And that's my plot.
And what about other writers? Do they help?
I am in a critique group, and we actually grew out of the class I took with Barbara Shapiro.
Oh.
And
I didn't know she teaches.
She taught way back then. She taught at the Cambridge Center for Adult Education.
Oh, I see. I see.
And I was fortunate to be one of her students, and I actually took a beginning course and then the advanced course, and that's where I met a couple of writers, and we decided we would continue the course at each other's houses. And our goal was to meet once a week. We really keep up that goal because people need to have pages, and sometimes we don't have enough people that are there. People go away.
And what people read, you read each other's works and help each other out. You find that very important, yeah? Well,
yes. I find it very important as long as I don't believe in reading aloud during the group. What works best for me, and that's the way my group is structured, is you get copies of the pages, and you read them beforehand, you write your comments, and then we sort of it's looser than it's gonna sound, but we pick a moderator, and that moderator says, okay, so Leslie, what did you think of Kathy's story? Or Mark, what did you think? And and we sort of go around the room, and then the writer can respond.
But you need a professional editor as well, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely.
That's very important to have a real editor. And was it hard to get published, or your first book?
Yeah, the first book was hard, and I mean, I think it took me 2 years to write it and 2 years to find an agent. Yeah. And
I was going to say something, excuse me. I was going to say something about the first historical book that you've written. Being a writer of a historical fiction myself, it is so easy because you research so much when you do history, right? It is so easy to throw in everything you know into the book and forget the story. And so we know so many things. We could write a real book of history as opposed to writing a real a story. That's what you have to really edit if you're doing historical fiction.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and it's too bad because we've researched all these things. We spent hours and hours in small rooms in the library.
You can only use so much, and I don't know. I think the kind of history that I like to read, and I do read history, I like biographies, and I like narrative nonfiction. History that tells a story in my other life, when I worked on American history textbooks, one of my favorite things to do was to write these little boxes that would tell a particular story about someone. And there's certain scenes that I love writing. There's certain kind of set pieces.
Oh, I see. I see. You find yourself repeating it in a different
no,
way,
it's not set. They're set pieces in the sense that you will find them. You will always find them. But I still love bringing what I can bring to those stories. Like I, for instance, find Lee's surrender to Grant. That's a very moving scene.
Yes.
And I loved writing it.
Yeah. Well, I think we have so much talent in New England and such a longer history that we're just brimming with stories from this whole region. We're coming closer to the end. Leslie Wheeler's my guest. Her book is Rattlesnake Hill. This is New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. Thanks so much for being with us. We discuss things and stories, philosophy from New England that interests us all. Thank you.
Thank you.